mean when all centers are defined? It means you are here to impact others deeply. That you really have to make sure you do your own inner work in terms of really seeing your value and not being driven by a need to prove your value or be right about your value so that you can be better present to others. It is a little trickier when all centers are defined to be empathic because that's not the most natural state energetically. So sometimes you have to really practice being present and receptive of others, not necessarily energetically, but in terms of your behavior and in terms of your being able to really take people in. This is a question that has an evolving answer because uh, this is a piece of information that I learned a certain way. And that now that I've really seen it in action, I kind of disagree with some of the ways that I was taught originally. So it's pretty, I would not be surprised if any of you have listened to more than one set of recordings. If you're like, what the heck did she just say? Because that's not the same thing she said black in that recording. Okay. So here's my current understanding. Ra used to teach that if somebody has a completely open center, it means they have no lessons to learn about that center in this lifetime. They've managed it, they've handled it, it has no bias about its conditioning, and it's easy to decondition. And I used to teach it that way because that's how I learned it. And now, having done, I don't even know how many readings at this point in my life, a lot, I don't think that's true. I find that the completely open center gets just as conditioned and maybe even to a certain degree in a more expansive, unlimited way because there's no gates connected to it to regulate how the theme gets played out. So what I have seen is, let's take the spleen as an example. What I have seen is people who have a completely undefined spleen who, in the way that I was taught, I would say, oh, well, you know, you don't have any lessons here on the spleen. And they would be totally crippled in fear. Every single one of the gates, the fear gates of the spleen, could be at any point in given time be playing out in their story, in their drama, in their conditioning field. So here's what I teach now. Because you have a completely open center, and that gives you a lot of variability in your experience there. It also means you can be very conditioned there in multiple kinds of different ways. However, what that also means, though, is that it is easier for you to decondition it because you're not locked into continuously repeating the same theme over and over again because you have a gate hanging there like a little magnet. But, and here's a but, you also have to look at what are the opposite electromagnetics to the center. So for example, if I have somebody who has a completely undefined spleen and they have no gate activations on it, right? But let's say they have the 26 defined, the gate of integrity, they are going to have an electromagnetic connection with the 44, which is going to deeply predispose their spleen to be working through the theme of truth or not in their relationships, or the fear of the past or not in their relationships. So you can't just say open spleen, no gate activation is easy to decondition without looking at, okay, what potentially could get drawn into the relationship dynamics of this person's spleen. Does that make sense, you guys? It's kind of a complex answer. And it's one of those answers that, you know, I'd love to give you a formula. Open spleen, no conditioning, no problem. That's a lie. So it's more like open spleen means a lot of variability, and you got to look at the whole chart and not just the center. You got to look at what's the dynamics going on in all directions of the center, because that's going to tell you a lot. Does that make sense?